So tonight, what I'm going to be talking about is overexcitabilities. So let me share my screen really quickly so we can get started. Okay. All right, teachers, thanks, Jen, appreciate it for the feedback. Okay. All right, so again, like I said, tonight we're gonna be talking about overexcitabilities. And we're gonna talk about embracing and understanding intensity. And before we start, I just want to preface this by saying I am not a researcher. I am not a published author or by any means. I've just been doing this for about a decade as gifted coordinator in my local school district. I am also a gifted individual myself and a parent of a gifted child. So what drew me to overexcitabilities is I felt it explained so much about me growing up, and then helped me understand the students I was working with. And then as I watched my own son grow, helped me understand a little bit more about what was going on in his brain. So when we think about gifted students, a lot of times I like to think about them in terms of the iceberg, and especially how society perceives the gifted student as the tip of the iceberg, the part we see. And for some students, that's the grades. For some students, that's the innate ability to do trivia or to play an instrument. And their inquisitiveness, or that they're a quick learner and that they're energetic. But my gifted experience, I felt there was so much people didn't understand about me and that I didn't understand about myself. And those were the things that kind of lied beneath the surface for me. And when I learned about the overexcitabilities, it helped me with so much of my insecurities and the struggles that I had, trying to feel like I fit in, like I was a part of something. And especially within my own family and within my peers. And a lot of that's explained by what's kind of underneath the surface. And I feel like the overexcitabilities is what helped me get to that point of understanding of myself, and which helps me understand my students all the more and my child all the more. And I also think that overexcitabilities, and this again from the practitioner's lens and just my own personal experience with students, gifted students, is this asynchrony. And sometimes the intellectual overexcitability is very strong, and we see high academic, verbal and math skills, but maybe there's emotional overexcitabilities as well that interfere with appearing to be of chronological age. And so I love this graph because it kind of just shows, I think what a lot of our gifted kids might be experiencing in their own their development, and what you may be seeing as a parent or a teacher in your classroom. And again, I feel like learning about the overexcitabilities explains so much of this asynchrony to me, so much of this, what's under the iceberg. And it's something I spend a lot of time looking at in my students, and actually presenting on to other parent groups out here on the Eastern Plains. So I won't read you this entire definition, but what you're looking at here is the long definition of overexcitabilities, but I've underlined this increased sensitivity, awareness, and intensity. And I feel like that explains so many of the gifted kids I work with, and so many of the traits in my own child and in myself that, I perceive as challenges and gifts on a daily basis. So especially that intensity, sometimes it's a wonderful thing, and sometimes it is anxiety inducing. But again, opening your eyes to what that really is and helping to understand it more can help you better serve your students if you're a teacher, or your child or children if you're a parent. And I see that we have a good mix of them on here today as I'm looking at the comments in here. Lots of parents from across the state, which is awesome to see. And then Eileen, again, thank you for joining us from Malaysia. It's bright and early there in the morning for her, I think. So again, I'm not a researcher, so what I know about overexcitabilities all comes from my understanding from texts that I've read with the work of this man. And I'm not going to try to butcher his first name, but Dabrowski, it says it all. He studied the theory of positive disintegration, which is much more complex than I would want to get into tonight. And honestly, that I can fully comprehend on my own. But he did have the theory of overexcitabilities, and he talked about the 5 overexcitabilities. We're going to go through them tonight. And as you have questions about each one, feel free to throw them in the chat. I have a couple questions that were posed by our members. So if I'm turning to look this way, I'm just looking at my other computer to reflect on those questions and see if I could squeeze them in throughout the chat. So the first one we're going to talk about is probably the one that's most common, and honestly, probably then the one that kind of shows up on the tip of the iceberg and is probably the most common when we think about gifted kids, especially as they're presented in the media. And it's intellectual overexcitability. So a typical intellectual overexcitable child may love puzzles and brain teasers trivia. These may be the kids that just cannot wait to start Brain Bowl or Knowledge Bowl every year, who love Jeopardy, maybe don't miss Jeopardy. They're the kids that aspire to be on Jeopardy. They may also be a kiddo that becomes interested in complex theories, sometimes at a very young age. Thank you, Internet, for being this endless source of wonder for so many kids. As long as parents, we kind of can monitor and rein that in. But I feel like my own son came across Carl Sagan all by himself at the age of 8. And, you know, thinking about their thinking, sometimes they tend to be more introspective and reflective about their thought processes. And because of that, because they think about their thinking so much, and because sometimes they tend to know a lot, they may really love to debate and argue with you. I know I spend a significant amount of time in the car with my son discussing politics, economics, government, the meaning of the depth of the solar system. I mean, you go on, you can go on and on, but he's always trying to figure out a way that I'm wrong. So he just loves to debate. He also loves to be right. And that's sometimes a challenge with intellectually excitable kiddos, is they really love being right. And it's kind of hard when they're wrong. And we can talk a little bit more about that as far as like imposter syndrome. And as the students get older, sometimes they encounter more challenge, and an intellectually overexcitable kid can really struggle with, I made a mistake. Oh, they're all going to figure out I'm not as smart as I thought I was. And now everybody's going to know it's just sham and I'm not really gifted. So you have to watch that with the intellectually overexcitable kids. They can also be kind of impatient with people who aren't as quick-witted as them, or as quick to move through curriculum possibly as them. So there's some things to look out for, but what I like to look at is how do we harness that, and how do we engage those intellectually overexcitable gifted children in productive thinking and activities. When I share the slideshow to coloradogifted.org so that you can access these resources later, you can click on this YouTube link. This is Sheldon Cooper's friendship algorithm. And I think sometimes gifted individuals who are intellectually overexcitable make logic out of things that are not typically logical. Like, how do I become a friend? How do I be a good friend? Well, if I can put it into a formula and make it work, then I will. And this is a stretch and a reach, but this is one of the typical media portrayals of the intellectually overexcitable child. But I love that it crosses over into that social piece and demonstrates how negotiating social situations can be a challenge for some of these gifted kiddos with intellectual overexcitability. So what can you do? How do you help? And if you're a teacher, you can look on the right side here of your screen. If you're a parent, look on the left. If you are a parent and a teacher of gifted individuals, this is not all encompassing, but these are some things that I know have worked and experienced and tried. So I think the best thing to do is encourage that curiosity at home and at school. And how we do that at home is just allowing them time to research those questions, engaging in those dialogues with them, and not being afraid to say, I don't know. Because a lot of times my son will bring up questions and ask me things, and I say, I don't know. He told me something the other day about neo-capitalism. And I was like, first thing I've heard about it. So then I Googled it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is too complex for me. But it was interesting to have that conversation with him and know he's looking at things that I never would have thought about as a 13-year-old, and encouraging that dialogue, and also encouraging where he's getting his information from and helping him be a good consumer of information. Our intellectually overexcitable kids will latch on to information, and sometimes they don't necessarily get it from the right source. We've had lots of conversations in our house about, where are you getting your information from? Have you checked with multiple sources? Because again, they're sponges and they want it all. Libraries, museums, zoos. Oh, we spent so much time in zoos when my children were younger. And I think they encourage her to find a way to change the situation. That's if it's something, there's something they don't like about what they're doing. How do we do something different? How do we change the situation? How do we feel more comfortable in that environment? At school, I honestly think project-based learning and inquiry-based learning is such a wonderful way to encourage kids to explore things within the curriculum that maybe aren't necessarily in the textbook, but are part of the standards. The thing I love about the Common Core standards, though, is their flexibility in some of, especially social studies, science, and English language arts. There's so much flexibility in how the standards can be taught. Inquiry-based learning is a great way to address those. The sticky notes and the poker chips on the left side, this is where they come up. I have encouraged some of my teachers who have those kiddos that are always raising their hand nonstop. Me, answer. I have the answer. I know the answer. You know, they're almost out of their seats, almost standing up. They're so excited. Even if the teacher does what we call cold calling, where they're just pulling names out of a hat or popsicle sticks or whatever, these kiddos can just, they want to share what they know very desperately. Or they can have a tendency to derail the class and get them very off topic because they had a tangential thought connected to the topic, but not exactly where the teacher wants to go. I've encouraged teachers to use a sticky note board, and they just have a corner of the classroom. It's a little board or even just a piece of poster board they put on the wall, and it says, I want to know, or something catchy. Teachers always have great little slogans and great ideas to put above it. But the kid can go over there and put their sticky note on the board, and then it can be a research opportunity later. It's also great for early finishers or kiddos that maybe have demonstrated the learning. If you do most difficult things first for intellectually overexcitable and gifted kids, doing the hardest questions first so that they don't have to do the entire assignment, they can prove that they know it so they can move on to something more complex. This would be one of those things that you could use that would be more complex. Level up, give them the opportunity to dive into that tangent and turn it into opportunity for them to present that to their peers, to solve a problem in their classroom, to solve a problem in their building. It's connected to the curriculum, but we're not asking kids to repeat 3 or 4 times the same learning as we would maybe in the standard curriculum. So we could go on about intellectual overexcitability, but we have 4 more to go. But if you have any questions about intellectual overexcitability, go ahead and post them in the chat. This is probably the most well-known and recognized of the overexcitabilities in our gifted kids, at least by society at large. So sometimes we don't have a lot of questions about this one. I'm going to pop over to my other questions to see if there was anything in here about intellectual overexcitability. No. Okay. So we are going to move on Oh, to perfectionism. I did touch on this a little bit about how when the gifted kid maybe does encounter challenge and makes a mistake, that imposter syndrome could creep in. A lot of times intellectually overexcitable kiddos are also perfectionists. Perfectionism isn't always bad. It can be unhealthy, but it can also be positive. And I'm sure if you've gone to college, you've probably been there. When you've had a paper due in a day or the next day, and you've maybe done the research, but you haven't written a word. And that little bit of stress can be enough to push you through. I mean, people who are master procrastinators, raising my hand, this can be productive. But if you let it go too far, it can be destructive. If you also hold yourself to such a standard that it is impossible to reach, it can be destructive. Two authors, and again, like I said, I'm a practitioner, not an expert, but two authors that I have looked to for resources for students over and over again are Dr. Dan Peters for the youngers, Worry Monster. That is a great, great text. Lisa Van Gemert, right? She talks about perfectionism a lot, but she actually wrote a book on perfectionism. And I believe that I've linked it at the end of this presentation in a resources slide for you. But these are two of my go-to for perfectionism and all that it entails, and some strategies that we can help with cope with that. Perfectionism could be a whole nother conversations with CAGT. So I will just make sure you have those resources in the chat. All right. So psychomotor is the next one that we're going to talk about today. And these kiddos could be the ones that you might have been, if you're a gifted teacher or a gifted coordinator like myself, the conversation often starts with these kiddos. Well, I don't know if he's gifted or has ADHD. And this is kind of the point where we're going to talk a little bit about some of these neurological differences like autism and ADHD. Sometimes that coexist with giftedness. A lot of times when I talk to teachers about this, or teachers come to me, I don't know if he's gifted or has ADHD. And I said he might have psychomotor overexcitability. And that's what you're looking at. And that's what you're seeing. I'm always hesitant to encourage pathologizing kids without having a doctor or somebody else who is certified or trained to look at them. So when someone approaches me like that, I approach it from the lenses, this might be an overexcitable kiddo and he just needs to move more. And some of our gifted kids, I don't know if this is the same as some of the parents listening today, but a lot of our gifted kiddos stop napping a lot earlier than we want them to. And they are much busier in their little brains and also their little bodies. So they may struggle to fall asleep. They may struggle with insomnia. They may not need to sleep as much. Overactive, intellectually excitable brains can cause this, but also so can psychomotor overexcitability. So having them move a lot is important. These may also be the kids that talk with their hands all the time. It might be your child who consistently is the one who spills the drink at the restaurant. Talks very fast. I struggle with fast talking, and I have to remind myself to slow down and think about what I'm saying, pace myself a little bit better. And so just that high level of energy, they tend to be more impulsive, which is sometimes where we get that ADD piece coming in or ADHD piece coming in. And sometimes this psychomotor overexcitability can be twofold. Sometimes the psychomotor overexcitability in a child that is not very coordinated can be very challenging. Sometimes psychomotor overexcitability in a child who is very coordinated can be very helpful, especially if they are also gifted athletically. There is, in Colorado, we do identify psychomotor giftedness. There is a category for that. And this is particularly used for students who are athletes, who are in the top level of their athletic ability, who need advanced learning plans for reasons of time out of school, if they travel to participate in national and world competitions. But so psychomotor can be twofold. You could have the clumsy psychomotor kiddo and the athletic psychomotor kiddo, but a lot of times they can tend to be very competitive. So what do you do with them? I had a question. I did have a question from a parent or a teacher. Oh, it was a teacher. She said psychomotor OE can be very tough in early childhood education. Just all the tapping, flipping, twirling, making noises, spinning around. You know, carpet time is probably not easy for a child with psychomotor overexcitability in a preschool or kindergarten classroom. And with full day kindergarten, I had half day kindergarten when I was growing up, and you know that probably ages me, but 35 years ago. But full day kindergarten can be a lot, especially for a kiddo that wants to move. And so we'll start with school here. Obviously, allow for brain breaks and organized movement. I think kindergarten teachers are the most incredible people in the world, especially kindergarten teachers of gifted kiddos, because gifted kiddos hum at a different frequency sometimes. I feel like a room full of them, it buzzes. And so, you know, organizing that movement every 20 minutes or so of time. You may not want to use stress balls or fidget toys with the younger kiddos because they may not have the ability to control what they do with it. You will find it flying through the air across the room or fighting over it with a friend. So maybe don't recommend the fidget toy or the small stress ball for littles. And know flexible seating is, gosh, I feel like it's probably started in kindergarten, right? Like sit where you want, just as long as you get your work done and we can maintain some level of organization. I think one of the questions, you know, how do we deal with all those noises, but build them into activities that help with long-term memory, executive functioning, and self-control? I believe this question was posed by Retha Butler Jenkins. So I don't know if she's on tonight, but my first thought, and I'm in secondary ed, and so the time I spend in kindergarten classrooms are largely in observation and very small groups. So that's why I admire them oh so much. I wonder about doing movement or dance when you're learning concepts, like using working memory strategies like songs, body movements, that kind of thing to help students remember new learning, and allowing for more station movement. Most of the kindergarten classrooms I spend time in, students are standing half the time anyway at their tables. So many kids can't sit in seats anymore. And I think that probably was exacerbated by COVID, because I see it more at higher grade levels than I've ever seen before. But incorporating the tapping, drumming, that kind of stuff into things that we use to recite for ways we do things in the classroom. So songs about cleaning up, songs about getting in line, maybe rhythms that we use to do things, or how we walk down the hall or get in line. That might help with working memory, but also executive functioning. Again, secondary ed is where I spent my pre-gifted years as an English language arts teacher. So this is just what I can give you based on my observations of kiddos. As I'm looking at some questions in the chat, Kara asks, what about when you give them time and then they're just even more crazy? They're even more excitable. Wow. Yeah, it seems like you just energize them even more if you give them more brain breaks. I think you have to look at every kiddo. Again, kindergarten classrooms aren't getting smaller because we're not getting, we don't have a huge abundance of teachers signing up to teach right now, unfortunately. And so I think kindergarten classes are getting smaller. So I would say, look at each individual child and kind of plan, especially if there's a particular one, plan around that. But then if you withdraw breaks or hold breaks for longer, then you might have other kids acting up as well. So different spaces in the classroom, different stations. Maybe there is a station in the classroom that is specifically for movement. I don't know if you could use some money that maybe is provided through some of the ESSER money or funds to get something where you put, have you seen those where they go onto your desk and they're little pedals? And I'm like, would that really burn any more calories for me during the day? So I'm thinking as like, a 40-year-old who wants to stay in shape, right? But I thought, gosh, for kiddos under their seats, or even in like a special movement section of the classroom, having that where the child could pedal and move their feet without it being disruptive. I know everything you introduce that's new into a classroom has the potential to be disruptive, but just some thoughts and ideas that might be possible. And I think every teacher has to do what they think is best in their space and with the way they do instruction. All right, we had one more question. What's a good way to advocate your child with psychomotor excitability to help the teacher understand they may need more body breaks? Jen, that's a great question. I think candidly explaining that, and when we post this coloradogifted.org to our website, send her the link to this. It's all free and it's all there, public access. If she's got YouTube, she can access this. You could send her the link to this section and talking about this, send her, the timestamp on it and say, I'd love to share this with you. My son can be a little overexcitable. What are some things that we can do together? Or how can I help you in the classroom? Is there something that I can do to support him needing these brain breaks? Or I think going in at it as a team, and while you may not actually physically be supporting that directly, but having a conversation with the child, it's like, hey, you're going to get some more brain breaks. I want you to use those to move so that when you're in class, we're staying focused and listening to our teacher. So there's lots of tools, and especially now that I think we're really a little bit more understanding of flexible seating, grouping, movement, I feel like educational research has moved in the way that supports a lot of these strategies. I think it's helping, but as always, advocating for your child and sharing information, because some teachers don't know. A lot of teachers go through their entire teacher preparatory program and they have maybe heard 30 minutes to an hour in their entire teacher prep program about giftedness. And I can guarantee you Overexcitabilities was not mentioned in the general ed teacher prep. So they may have no idea what these even are. When I present these to teachers, light bulbs just go on. Oh my gosh, that explains so much about Bobby or Shelly. So just to help you with that, please feel free to share this information. All right, so we're going to move on to the next one so we don't run out of time tonight, and I want to make time for questions, but I'm trying to stop as we go so we don't have them all piled up at the end. Sensual overexcitability. So this is one, and I feel like parents probably experience this far more than teachers, although teachers I'm sure do, especially in the younger grades. But I think parents experience a lot with the clothes, the shoes, the socks. If you don't follow foullanguagecomics.com, he is actually, you can follow him on Facebook. Since you're on Facebook here, I'll mention that page. Hilarious parenting stories, but I love this one. And the tag on the shirt, thank goodness for whoever decided to start making tagless clothing, because I think it has saved the sanity of so many parents. But sensual overexcitability is having a heightened sensitivity to any of the five senses: touch, taste, smell, sight. So think light and sound. So while obvious as a parent, it can make getting out the door a little hard. One thing about sensual overexcitability is that sometimes these kiddos are very aesthetically aware. So they are maybe great at like putting together different colors, so artistically, or even with like their clothing. They may be very drawn to good food and good music. They may experience those things more deeply too. So I don't know if you've seen the viral video of the baby that his mother starts to sing and the baby starts to cry just at the sound of her voice. He may be a sensually overexcitable child as early as like, however, he's like maybe 10 months in that, because he has an appreciation for that sound, the sound of her voice. And it's a beautiful singer. The flip side is some might be culinary masters, and they may, be the kids that show up on Top Chef because they just have the taste buds for amazing food. They might also subsist entirely on a diet of chicken nuggets and mac and cheese. So they may be picky eaters as well. There are two sides to every coin. They sometimes can be overstimulated by noise, light. If you have a child that comes home with headaches every day, because they've been in classrooms with fluorescent lights, that may be a challenge. Adults, you might, especially, I don't know if you've women who have been pregnant, the sense of smell is heightened. And I didn't wear perfume for both 9 months pregnant with both my children because the smell bothered me. Well, imagine if you're a little child and you are sensitive to different smells in the classroom. The lunchroom smell, if you walked into an elementary building lately, the lunchroom smell is pretty intense. But also, their teacher's perfume. As they get older, middle school, can you go into middle school without smelling Axe body spray? I don't know. But it can be a lot. And so being in that setting all day with the bright lights and the varying temperatures of classrooms, sometimes too hot, sometimes too cold, the noise of all the kids, especially middle school, all that Axe body spray and Bath and Body Works smell, it can be a lot. And so they can be stressed by overexposure, but they can also be susceptible to overindulgence. So, like, oh my gosh, these brownies are so good, I'm going to have 10, not just one. That can happen because, again, they appreciate all those senses. So again, like I said, they can come home from school. If your kiddo comes home cranky from school and they just seem like it's just been too much, maybe they're a little testy, they're a little irritable, it could be that they have had too much exposure to all the things that are just sensory overload. So at home, encouraging them to take time to just chill in their room, read a book, listen to music, put the headphones on. The older they are, meditation and yoga could be great, going for a run, whatever they need to do to kind of unwind and de-stress and remove some of that stimulus is helpful. As a teacher, just being in tune to some of those kids that tend to withdraw when maybe a classroom activity gets too loud, or who maybe have troubles associating with their peers in like uncomfortable settings, loud settings where people are too close. A lot of times at school, it's not as big of an issue, but when we think about like extracurriculars, as they go into high school, especially, sporting events and dances can be challenges for these students. At home, I think that's where we probably see it more, especially with the cooking. I love spending time making a delicious big dinner for my family, for my kids to not eat it. It's my favorite thing, but it happens a lot. And it's gotten better as they've gotten older. They've kind of matured in their taste, but younger, I always had a set of chicken nuggets going in the air fryer because I knew, I just needed a backup plan. Texture is going to matter. Maybe the kiddo that keeps a hoodie on literally all the time. You have to like take it from them physically in order to get it into the washing machine, because sometimes they have decided that this is my favorite hoodie. It's so soft. It's so comfortable. I can put it up and I can keep light out of my eyes or sound out of my ears. I feel safe and contained in this space. And also it's very soft and it smells like me, and it doesn't smell like the cafeteria food or my teacher's perfume, and I can just be in my space. Sometimes it's a challenge as a parent to be like, dude, I need to wash that. That needs to go in the laundry. Like, we have to wash it at least like once a week. Okay. But I've had kiddos comment to me. They got one kid, he's a high school student, got a free shirt from a college fair. He's like, Miss, this is my new favorite shirt. And I'm like, oh, are you going to go to CSU? That's awesome. He's a freshman, And so you're going to CSU? That's awesome. He goes, no, miss, feel it. I was like, what? And I felt it. And it was probably literally the softest t-shirt I've ever felt. And it was like, I get it, dude. He's like, I'm wearing this every day underneath my hoodie. And I was like, every day, huh? A freshman boy. every day is not a good idea. But, you know, it was just obvious that texture mattered to him, and that was important. All right. I do want to touch, before I go into imaginational overexcitability, someone did ask about how do we safely address sensual overexcitabilities in the area of taste and touch. I'm not 100% clear on that question. So Christine, my email's on this slideshow. If you want to email me later and I can clarify or send you to someone who might be able to better help. In school settings, taste and touch, I think, you know, taste is going to be the kiddos that refuse to eat school lunch, and because they don't like the taste of it or they don't like the smell of it. And so, you know, a conversation with parents saying, yeah, they're not eating lunch at school because they don't like it. Could you make sure to pack them something that they will eat, even if it's just like, you know, a ham and cheese sandwich or something. Just making sure that they have enough fuel to get them through the day. As far as touch, I'm wondering if you're meaning touch, the person who submitted this was meaning touch as in touching other people or not wanting to be touched. And so that's something that's just going to require some conversation about boundaries and about respect for that need to not be touched. I did note on here, like, respect your child's need to be touched or not be touched. I am, my husband calls me Cactus. It's just his nickname for me, but I'm not a hugger. I need a shirt that says that, not a hugger. And it's not because I don't like people. It's just, I like my personal space, and there's something about that being invaded. And so in a school setting, that might be something we have to think about as well. All right, so imaginational overexcitability. I'm gonna check really quickly before with any questions. No, we're good. Okay. I will address questions as we go, so please just feel free to pop in the chat any questions that you have. So imaginational overexcitability is one I love to talk about because, again, like every one of these, there are some wonderful positive things that I think we should embrace as parents and teachers and find ways to lift up and support, because these are like the superpowers that are going to get these kids engaged and excited about what they're learning. But there are also some things that we may have to do and some strategies that we have to do to support them with some of the challenges that these overexcitabilities present. So these kiddos may be ones when they were younger that are more likely to have imaginary friends. They could be wonderful little storytellers. And by that, I mean, not always telling the full truth. Maybe it starts out as, you know, we were on the playground and Sarah said, and then we did, and then pretty soon you're like, but that, did that really happen? I don't know if that really happened. And I have a little one that does that, and I have to just kind of go, okay, wait, this story is getting a little funny. This is getting a little hinky. Did that really happen? No. Sometimes too, though, these kiddos, because they have such active imaginations, they can have very vivid and detailed dreams. And so if they're overexcitable and psychomotor, intellectual, and they're having trouble sleeping and falling asleep at night, but they're also imaginationally overexcitable and they have vivid and detailed dreams, this could be the thing that as a parent, it has them running into your room at 2 a.m., keeping you awake. My son went through a spell of about 9 months where we did not get a lot of sleep in our house. You know, while I said earlier, the internet's great for kids who want to like figure out, you know, black holes and really cool stuff like that. It's also not great for our really imaginative kiddos who can latch onto one thing, maybe one scary thing, and not be able to let it go. So those are some things as parents just to be aware of. They can visualize their creations that they want to make in great detail. You see the little boy here making this wonderful Lincoln log house. Shout out to my elder millennials and Gen Xers who remember the Lincoln logs. He may have built that whole thing himself, but it probably took him a few tries, because sometimes when we are imaginationally overexcitable, you see what you want, but when you're little and your fine motor skills and maybe your executive functioning skills, like your planning skills, aren't quite there, it may get very frustrating trying to bring your creations to fruition. and your visualizations to fruition. So, oh, the last one too, they might be daydreamers. I love Ariel. What a daydreamer, right? They might be daydreamers and seem really far away. So these might be the kids that are not always doing the best in school. And one of our members asked a question about what about our excitable nonverbal? By nonverbal, I mean identified in using their identified as gifted, but usually through like a visual spatial assessment mechanism that helped us see that they are able to recognize patterns and shapes and put them together and make those visual spatial connections. So we identify them as gifted and they're highly creative, but they're not necessarily academically strong. So how do we best serve those? And so these are some of the strategies and tips that I have, because I do think our creative individuals, the artists, especially the ones, you know, like you think about famous artists from the past, they may not have been excellent mathematicians. I mean, Da Vinci aside, I think he was probably amazing, but you look at Frida Kahlo, might not have been amazing at calculus, but she's a beautiful, wonderful artist. People who write amazing stories may not have wanted to be a scientist when they grew up. They may not been able to explain black holes, but they might be wonderful storytellers and become amazing authors. And so how do we support those students who, you know, we have to take math, we have to take science. How do we support those students to express themselves, even in the subjects that might be challenging for them? So incorporating the arts into projects and indulging in that creativity is huge. Content, process, product, right? When teachers, if you are a teacher, you've heard that 1,000 times, content, process, product, right? How can we differentiate the content, the process, or the product to allow a child to express themselves creatively? They may, by the very nature of creating an art piece that represents the symbolism in a novel that they read, they may learn the importance of symbolism and illusion. Whereas if they would have just taken a test or written a short response or an essay about it, they may not be able to retain that information. But allowing them opportunities to incorporate creativity in the arts and the projects so that they can retain the information, and being flexible with how we evaluate that and how we evaluate their understanding of that could be really helpful to a student. At home, encourage it. I don't know. I play like roulette with my kids. Like they show interest in something. I'm like, okay, let's try it. You know, I bought my son a guitar, podcast equipment, basketballs. We try to just, if they show an interest in something, I try to indulge it until they find the thing that fits, because a lot of times our creative individuals are also dabblers. And so they'll dabble with painting, they'll dabble with music, they'll dabble with writing. How can we allow them that free space to dabble without feeling like they are not feeling like it's okay to fail? Like, it's okay for me to attempt this and not do good at it. It's okay for me to attempt this and not do good at it. I can try different things to find what really kind of feeds me and feeds my creativity. And so I encourage to do that at home, encourage them to write, but also like, hey, you know, like sometimes we have to rein it in and we have to come back and we have to do that math assignment. You know, we have to study for that math test. We need to know these skills so that we can get through school, because, you know, graduation. And it's hard with these kids. These are the hardest kids to explain the importance of, like, or the need to kind of play the game of school. And I feel like as an educator, I know my child may not grow up to be some world-class mathematician, but I need to get him through Algebra 2. Like, I need to get him through that so that he can, when he does go to college and he does need to take those prerequisite math courses, he's not ill prepared. And that's just the reality of the situation. But sometimes that's harder with intellectually overexcitable kiddos, because sometimes they just want to do their art. So as much as we can incorporate that creativity into other things, I think is our best answer. All right, the last one, because we have 10 minutes left. And again, I could go on about these for a long time. I feel like these help me understand my children, myself so much better. This one especially, because I think as we are neurodivergent and as we think about our neurodivergencies, like our sensual overexcitability, and how it sometimes can sound a little bit like traits of autism, how we can talk about ADHD and how it sometimes psychomotor can sound like traits of ADHD. And we talk about those overlapping neurodivergent and neurologically different behaviors and ways of being. I think it's important to understand also that gifted children can sometimes have a more intense, emotionally overexcitable states. And I think this is as they get older and maybe aren't as open with their parents. And I know just as my teenager's gotten older, I've noticed a distance in his comfort level with talking to me about some of his feelings. And he may feel more comfortable talking to another adult about that. But my 10-year-old daughter loves to talk about her feelings and is very open about how she's feeling. But as we look at emotionally overexcitable kiddos, it's important to pay attention to them, especially as they age with these intensities. They're often very empathetic. These are the kids that feel what others are feeling. And if they are watching the news right now, they're probably struggling. I know I think this is, the news is probably the hardest thing for an emotionally overexcitable child to kind of watch and understand, especially the younger they are, especially when there's a lot of turmoil, and the 24-hour news cycle does not help because it gives us no break from that. A lot of times they will seek deeper friendships, and therefore they might have less friends. They may only have one or two really close friends. They may be a little bit more introverted, possibly because being surrounded as an empath, being surrounded by a lot of people, especially in the preteen years, with all the hormones and stuff, it might be exhausting to be around a lot of high intensity emotions. They're also probably more likely to blush, but also have stomach pain, other illnesses, headaches in response to emotions. So, the kiddo that doesn't really seem sick, but is just saying they have a terrible stomach ache and doesn't want to go to school, might want to check in with them, see what's going on. Something going on at school that's challenging for you, something that they're going on, in here or in here that's challenging, because they tend to sometimes manifest their emotional state kind of outwardly. And they can sometimes be accused, because of those heightened fears and anxieties, be accused of overreacting. And these are the kids, you're too this, you're too that. I feel like a lot of kiddos with overexcitabilities hear that all the time. You're too loud, you're too busy, you're too sensitive, you're too touchy, you're too picky, you're too, and for an emotionally overexcitable child to hear this all the time is probably challenging for them and probably makes an impact on how they feel about themselves. So being careful with those words and helping them process their intense emotions is going to be important. I love this quote by Zooey Deschanel, and I sent it to a good friend of mine who is emotionally overexcitable, and she cries all the time, constantly, and that's fine. It's other than the fact that someone else crying triggers me, and then I cry, and then we're all crying. But this quote's great, and it touches on that too sensitive, too mushy, too wishy-washy. And she just says, no, it's great to be sensitive. It's great to allow yourself to be affected by things. So I think this is important to share with those kids, because when we think about our empaths and we think about our sensitive people, these are the people, they're the helpers. They're the ones that want to make the world right and support other people. They're the people who can see someone's upset and ask them how they're doing. I think there's oftentimes they see too wishy-washy, too mushy, too sensitive, but I think harnessing that and how can we encourage them to use that to be a helper. But I think as a parent, sometimes, especially as a parent of a middle schooler or a teenager, it can be challenging. So encouraging them to have a space to release their emotions and not feel stigmatized by it. Encouraging them to identify things that trigger them. I don't know about anybody else, but I cannot watch those ASPCA commercials. As soon as Sarah McLachlan comes on, I'm out. I just know I have to change the channel, or else I'll just be a sobbing mess. I'll be a sobbing mess. And then, you know, makeup, all that is a mess. And then my husband looks at me like I'm crazy. Like, what is your deal? I'm like, it's the song and the puppies. But sometimes they come upon you in ways that are random, and you don't know why you're crying. And I think that for a teenager, that can be really embarrassing. And so that's the little Malcolm in the middle. I'm just going to go crawl under a rock now. How can we help them to feel empowered by their emotions and their empathy, instead of, you know, like they need to crawl under a rock? So at school, I do have kids that sometimes struggle with this, and they will get a timeout. They will ask a teacher, can I go to the bathroom? Helping them know how to do that without feeling like they're ostracizing themselves is you know, helpful. Deep breathing, journaling, meditation, painting, artistic expression, those are all things that I think are helpful. Going for a run, exercising is huge for some people. Going for a run, a walk, weightlifting, those are really great ways to increase good chemicals in your body and lift your mood. The other thing, and I won't go too into depth in this, but existentialism with the emotionally overexcitable kiddo, especially if they have paired with intellectual overexcitability and they ask deep questions and think about their thinking. I love this Calvin and Hobbes cartoon, and just what is the point of human existence? And the teacher kind of dismisses it because he's probably doing a spelling list or math or something, or, you know, they're learning about the, you know, bicameral House or bicameral Congress. And she's like, this is not having anything to do with what we're talking about. But he's like, but I want to know before I expend any more energy on this. It's typical Calvin. But I think as our kids get older, they start to have this, what is my place in this world? Why am I here? How am I important? Why am I important? And emotionally overexcitable partnered with intellectual overexcitability, we can see this happening a lot. Jenny Hecht, who is wonderful and has been a speaker on here before, and will be speaking at CAGT, does an incredible presentation on existential depression, existential angst, just existentialism in general. And I just love what she has to share. She's also got I think a great Facebook page called Still Rising, and she addresses some of these things. She's just wonderful. So I won't even go too much into depth with that, but it is something to pay attention to as kids get older, is them questioning their place in the world and how they fit, and recognizing that that can be a very challenging topic for them, and can lead to, especially if it's partnered with anxiety or depression that already exists, it can be something you want to keep an eye on. But it is an important part of questioning who we are and what we want to be. And so helping them through that process will be important. And it doesn't always present itself very openly. So as a parent and a teacher, just keeping your ears out for those kind of things is great. Jen, drinking water helps emotional reactions. It's nearly impossible to cry and drink at the same time. Thank you for that tip. Next time I feel like I'm going to cry inappropriately, I'm just going to have a drink of water and hope it goes away. Because it does. It happens all the time. I'll hear this crack in my voice every time presenting this, and you might have heard it. Every time presenting this, I crack a couple times throughout because I'm about to cry. And I've done this. I've presented this multiple times, but I still feel this so deeply because it connects to me so much, but also connects to the children I work with and children I serve so much, and children I have served who are now adults themselves. And so Jen, thanks for the tip. I'm just going to take a drink every time I feel like crying now. But to come back to Calvin, if you want to know a little bit more about an overexcitable gifted kid, Calvin is probably one of them. Imaginationally, Psychomotor, Sensual, I don't know. I'd have to reread some of those, but he definitely hits imaginational, psychomotor, and sometimes emotional. He gets a little deep there with Hobbes every once in a while. Oh, Jen, every time I watch the end of Encanto, I have to drink. Oh my gosh. I've watched it like 3 times this last week and I'm just tearing up all the time. But the one thing I want to leave you with this visual here is that these overexcitabilities do not have to be something that need to be moderated or mediated. I gave you strategies to help support students who have these, but I think the best way to look at them is what can these overexcitabilities, how can we harness these in a way that empower our students, empower them to be creative, empower them to be sensitive to others and right wrongs, empower them to create great art and music and food, and empower them to be leaders and researchers and debaters and people who question things. I think those are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful traits that our gifted kids have. And I think the overexcitabilities are not something to be remedied, but something to be harnessed and focused for a greater good, to drive kids to be their best version of themselves. And while it can be hard in the moment, I think if we look at them as assets rather than challenges, we have a bunch of superheroes on our hands. So this is another one that makes me cry, Jen. So I'm gonna take a drink. Because I really think someone should have told me this a lot younger. And I would love, I always share this with my students because I think they need to know. You would never know who would love the person you hide. So let those overexcitabilities shine bright. And I think we have to remember this too, as educators, for the educators on here. I think it's important to remember that, the classroom full of gifted kids, I said it before, they hum, they're at a different frequency. It does not, just because they are bright, does not mean they're straight A students. It doesn't mean they're perfect. It doesn't make them easier to teach. They still have needs, just like all kids. But sometimes their needs are different, and sometimes their challenges are different, as we saw today talking about all these overexcitabilities. I think it's important that they all deserve to learn and grow, and they all deserve to be challenged, and for their traits to be acknowledged and supported. So those are 2 of the quotes that I share all the time, because I think these little poems and quotes are so important. As you go to talk to your gifted kiddo or your gifted kiddo's teacher, or go back to your classroom, I encourage you to just remember these 2 quotes. And I'm also linking resources here for you. So there's just some links in here for our conversations with CAGT, SANG, just our Facebook page that has lots of great articles. But then I did quote here, Perfectionism, a Practical Guide to Managing Never Good Enough. That's Lisa Van Gemmert's book on perfectionism. Make Your Worrier a Warrior. That's Dr. Dan Peters' book, and he's done a CWC on here. So if you go to coloradogifted.org, click on resources, click on conversations with CAGT, you will find Dr. Peters' presentation. Another person I recommend watching is Matt Zakreski, Dr. Matt. He's incredible. And he has done 1 or 2 CWCs with us, which is amazing. Yes, Charity, Living with Tensity is a great resource. Again, also anything by Jim Delisle and James Webb. So this is not the last slide. The last slide has some more resources and links that I used in this presentation, but I will share this as a PDF to the CAGT Facebook page, or not Facebook page, but the website at coloradogifted.org. This presentation has been recorded and will also be available there. If you want to advocate for your child and you think you have a child with multiple overexcitabilities, please feel free to direct them to this presentation, to the slideshow, to any of these resources, to the book, Living with Intensity, also a great one. So It is 6:04. We are technically past time. I was worried about being the host and the presenter and not being able to fill up enough time. But I'm sure that my friends at CAGT who know me are not surprised that I use the entire hour plus some. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments still, even after we go off live, and or send them to my email. I did link it here. I will also put it back up at the top. If I can get back there. I cannot get back there. So let's just do it this way so I don't slide through everything. So I put my email address back up on there for you. So if you have any questions or want any resources or want me to email you this PDF directly, I am happy to. Feel free to reach out to me. That is my work address. And I've enjoyed hanging out with you guys tonight. And I'm going to go get some dinner with my family. And Jen, thank you. Carrie, appreciate it. Charity, thank you for hanging in there. Aaron, I'm glad you loved it. And I know I got to tell you guys, this is super important to me, and it helps me understand me, my kids, my own child so much better. So, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to learn about this. So feel free to check out some information. Google Over-Excitabilities, Living with Intensity. Read more. The more you read, the more you'll understand. And I think it will help you with your kiddos, yourself, and advocate for your kiddos in school. So I'm gonna let you guys all go. I can't quite remember who's coming on next week. Before we leave, I will tell you who will be here next week. We had Diane Hecox on last week, and she was incredible. Underachieving or under learning. What a good presentation with Mark Hess. Next week on March 22nd, looks we have Jason Clark and Shelley Ruffner, but I don't know what they're presenting, so it's a surprise. And the following week we have Christina Collins. So, and she's going to be talking about meeting needs of gifted students. And I think we've got quite a full lineup coming for you. So please join us next week for a surprise presentation. And I will let you all go have a wonderful evening. I'm going to go have Taco Tuesday with my family. Have a great night.